Hamas hands over the remains of another captive as part of the ceasefire deal with Israel. 18 bodies remain in Gaza and the group says it needs heavy machinery to retrieve them. But Israel says Hamas knows where they are. So is time running out? And will Israel use the delay as an excuse to resume the war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Tom McRae. The agreement was for Hamas to return all of the Israeli captives, both the living and the dead, within 72 hours of signing the ceasefire deal. It's been more than a week and 18 bodies have yet to be handed over. Hamas maintains it's committed to the terms of the US president's plan, but it's calling for heavy machinery to retrieve the captives' remains, as well as those of the 10,000 Palestinians believed to be buried under millions of tons of rubble. Hamas is accusing Israel of deliberately hampering the search. Israel insists Hamas is dragging its feet, and the US is downplaying claims the group is violating the deal. All the while, the lives of Palestinians in Gaza depend on the return of Israel's dead. So will Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu resume the war? And is President Donald Trump prepared to give him the green light? We'll put that and a bunch of other questions to our guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
A somber return in Tel Aviv. The remains of a 10th captive transferred to Israel under the terms of the Gaza ceasefire deal. It was identified as 75-year-old Eliyahu Margalit, killed during the Hamas-led attack 2 years ago. But the bodies of another 18 captives are yet to be handed over. Israel says Hamas knows where they are and is violating the agreement. It's already reduced the number of aid trucks allowed into Gaza and threatened to resume the war.
We will not compromise on this, and we will spare no effort until our fallen hostages return, every last one of them.
Hamas says it's committed to recovering the remains of all of the captives, but needs help.
If Hamas has released the living, why would it want to keep the dead? Hamas has no interest in keeping the bodies. There's a logistical problem and everyone's working to solve it.
The group says it needs excavation experts and heavy machinery to remove the mountains of debris caused by 2 years of Israeli bombardment. Turkiye has already sent a team, but it's waiting for Israeli permission to enter the strip.
Could Israel use Hamas's inability to recover bodies from under the rubble due to the lack of equipment as an excuse to break the ceasefire again? This is a concern for the international community.
The US is downplaying concerns, however, saying it believes Hamas is still acting in good faith. The agreement acknowledged it would be difficult to retrieve the remains quickly.
It's a rough deal when you think of it, right? Very rough. We have our hostages back completely. We were very lucky with that, but it's a tough situation.
For everyone involved, it's clear. Under Gaza's destroyed landscape is widespread carnage. The Civil Defense Agency says it's getting dozens of requests daily for help to find the bodies of loved ones. Another challenge is identifying the bodies of Palestinians returned by Israel, many of which show signs of torture and abuse. Hospitals have only basic equipment and no advanced DNA testing capabilities.
They have sent numbers and we don't know their names. We don't know how to describe which is for which. And everyone is saying, this is my son, and we do not know.
Countless families left with a fear they may never find their loved ones or get closure. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. Ori Goldberg is an Israeli political commentator and joins us from Tel Aviv. In Amman is Xavier Abu Eid, a political analyst and former Palestine Liberation Organization communications director. And in Istanbul is Mehmet, Celik, editorial coordinator at the daily Sabah, an English language newspaper in Turkiye. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Inside Story. Ori, if I can begin with you, please. Can you just give us an idea of how this is all being perceived in Israel, the delay of the bodies being returned? Because the return of the bodies is incredibly emotional there. Everyone knows the names of the captives that have been held over the last couple of years. They know their backstories. So it's not just important for the families and the loved ones, is it? It's important for the whole of Israel for them to get closure.
It's important for the whole of Israel, both emotionally and also, and this is important, as a kind of a milestone. Once the bodies are returned, then as far as Israelis are concerned, the war is over, and any problems Palestinians have in Gaza or anywhere else are their own. So it's important for Israelis to attain a sense of closure, again, not just emotionally, not just in terms of relations with the families, but also in what Israelis would now refer to as strategy. Once this is over, we've accomplished our war goal. We haven't destroyed Hamas, but we've done this. So now we can turn to other things. In that sense, it is important. But there's also a sense that there are no expectations from Hamas, and also kind of a dawning recognition that Hamas may actually have a point. The difficulties are clear. Of course, there are many Israelis who openly say we should resume the war, but it seems like our leadership has gotten its marching orders from President Trump, who has his own marching orders from his partners in the Gulf. The war will not be resumed. Trump seems apparently adamant about that. And as far as the majority of Israeli Jewish society goes, there seems to be acceptance of that fact, combined with a sense of relief, I suppose, because all the living hostages are here. The dead hostages, it's difficult. It'll take time. It will resolve itself. And the most important thing I think Israel wants as a society is simply to be able to ignore the situation in Gaza as completely as possible.
OK, Javier, Ori saying there that in Israel it feels like the war is over, or that's how it's perceived there. That is certainly not the case for everyone that is still living their lives in Gaza. Can you just give us your thoughts on where you think things stand at the moment? And obviously the ceasefire is extremely fragile.
Thank you. I fully agree with what you're saying. Certainly, the ceasefire is very fragile. But let's not forget that Israel is engaged in a war against the Palestinian people, the land and the people of Palestine. When Benjamin Netanyahu set his goals, he spoke about 5 to 7 fronts he would be fighting on, including the occupied West Bank. And what we have here is a very limited ceasefire agreement just for Gaza. And even in Gaza, we see how it is being violated. Perhaps we are going to see more news now from the occupied West Bank. I fully agree, by the way, with what Ori is saying. I think at this stage, the U.S. administration may be putting more efforts in order to not to resume the genocidal war. But still, we have people being killed. Still, the conditions are not there in Gaza for reconstruction or even for the full entry of humanitarian aid. And I think I would just like to add one point with regards to the context. I mean, why would you accept that Israel has a veto right over the amount of food you have in Gaza? I mean, what's the security issue for Israel if we have 5,000 trucks entering Gaza every day with food, with medicines, with very basic stuff? So we should understand that even under the terms of this ceasefire agreement, Israel remains the occupying power in Gaza. Therefore, they remain on control of over 2 million Palestinians there.
Yeah, and when it comes to aid, that's what the same argument that we've been hearing from the likes of the WHO and other NGOs that are desperately trying to push Israel to allow more aid into Gaza. Mehmet, can you just give us your evaluation of how the return of the bodies of Israeli captives is actually going? Hamas says it needs heavy machinery and specialist help. I mean, surely that isn't an unreasonable ask, is it? Because Israel is they're the ones that are desperate to get those bodies back.
Well, Tom, I think before answering your question, I think there is a double standard on focus on the hostages or the prisoners. We're always talking about the Israeli hostages living or deceased or the ones that are under the rubble. But we very rarely, I mean, I'm not just talking about this show, but international media in general is solely focusing on Israeli prisoners or Israeli hostages, where there's thousands and thousands of Palestinian prisoners released alive, and they have undergone through systemic torture. They're at least documented cases show that, let alone the many that are deceased and they're not even identifiable. Nevertheless, I think the hostage situation is so far going as logistically as possible in terms of returning the bodies. Given the amount of the rubble and the logistical difficulties in Gaza, I think still Hamas or those who will be organizing retrieving the bodies of the Israeli hostages, they will still need a lot of technical help, not just machinery itself, but also I think technical help is needed. The know-how is needed in terms of search and rescue operations. So for that, in that sense, I think it's not something that could happen from today to tomorrow. It is something that will perhaps require days and even perhaps weeks until those bodies are located, retrieved, and even identified. So in that sense, I think it is realistic to expect that this is taking time. And I think Hamas, if they're saying we need more equipment, we need more machinery, and that technical support must be provided so that the bodies can be retrieved. Otherwise, I mean, if they're claiming that this is a technical difficulty, let's solve that and see if they're actually abiding by the terms of the agreement.
Okay. Ori, if that is, as we heard there, the way that this is being framed, that it is going to take time to get those bodies back, why isn't Israel trying to do all it can to help? Because it just seems to be blaming Hamas at this point in time. And if it does take weeks or longer than a month to find those bodies and retrieve them, is that going to be acceptable there?
Well, Tom, the almost self-explanatory answer is that Israel is not doing everything it can because Israel is weak. I agree fully with what Xavier and Mehmet have said, and I'd like to point out that the longer this takes, the worse it is for Israel. Because if days and weeks actually go by before these bodies are retrieved, and the situation in Gaza is not going to wait for Israel to make up its mind. It's being rapidly internationalized, which has always been something Israel has vehemently resisted in any aspect of its quote-unquote conflict with the Palestinians. And Israel right now is not able to do either one of the two things it might do. The first is to resume the war. I think it's gotten very clear instructions not to do that, the genocidal war. And the second is to go into Gaza under pretense of peace or logistical cooperation with Hamas, because Israel has so adamantly claimed that it is committed to the destruction of Hamas, that any such cooperation would, in the eyes of Prime Minister Netanyahu's voters and supporters, which constitute the great majority of Israeli society, would be seen as a gesture of acknowledging or recognizing Hamas's durability in the Strip. So Israel, of its own doing, has simply eliminated all of its options. All it can do now is spill Palestinian blood, obstruct and obfuscate. And that is exactly what it is doing. Again, the cautious optimism that I find in this situation has, of course, nothing to do with the continuation of the genocide. Obviously, that is true. But the cautious optimism comes from the fact that gradually, more quickly than not, Israel is no longer the only one who's calling the shots. I agree with Xavier. It is the occupying power, but its authorities are being stripped away on a daily basis by a broad variety of international actors who are now active in Gaza, who now have their eyes on Gaza. Israel is weak. Despite the havoc it wreaks, it is as weak as it has been over the past 2 years.
Okay, Javier, if you can just pick up on some of those points that Ori was making there. And as we heard from the Hamas spokesperson in the story that we ran at the beginning of the show, is saying, why would Hamas want to delay the return of the bodies? What possible incentive do you think that they have to do so? And what actions do you think that Hamas should be taking now, apart from trying to get those bodies out as quickly as possible?
I'll come to your question, but I think what Ori was saying, it's particularly important because we may be witnessing a turning point that for all over our lives we haven't seen. so far, which is Israel being stripped of a lot of its power. Now, I'm not as optimistic as Ori is, but we also understand that we would not have gotten to this ceasefire agreement without this extraordinary international mobilization that pushed many governments to discuss taking concrete measures. That now in the European Union, there are governments that are talking about sanctions, which is something, when I was an official myself, it was almost impossible to hear from European officials, the main trade partner of Israel. So this turning point is actually pushing President Trump to be more forceful, if we would say, with Israel. And I think that this may be the key, because the agreement itself is very weak and it's very vague. But perhaps it could be a personal involvement of President Trump that may want to say to himself that he's the one who got a peace deal, which is not yet what we have. Now, regarding your question, Tom, I think once again I will repeat what I think I said here in Jazeera a couple of weeks ago. Hamas has been running out of options, and there are three countries that are very important for Hamas, that are very keen for this agreement to work, which are Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt. And from that perspective, I think even when Hamas is trying to think about the day after, the post-war scenario for them, they are very interested to have at least a stage one of the agreement respected. Therefore, I think it's not on Hamas' interest not to bring back the bodies. At the same time, that I would say it may be on Israel's interest to put some pressure, saying, well, it's Hamas actually that doesn't want the agreement to keep moving.
As we heard there, Mehmet, that this is now an international issue. Many other countries are involved: Turkiye, Saudi, Pakistan, the US, Qatar, Egypt, obviously, as well as mediators. I mean, can you just give us a sense of what Turkiye is able to do at this point in time? Exactly, as one of the mediators, what is it pushing for? How is it doing that?
Well, first of all, the sustainability of the ceasefire is the initial, I think, pressure that Turkey wants to put on. And secondly, of course, delivery of humanitarian aid. And thirdly, ensuring that, the hostage exchange is completed. But I think more importantly, what will come after today, after all these three steps are done, what will come in terms of unification of, I think, political bodies in terms of who will govern the Palestinians in Gaza, or what does this initial phase mean for the second phase and the unification of Palestinians as a people, not just as people in Gaza, West Bank, or elsewhere? But that political transition is something that Turkey will, of course, diplomatically put its weight behind. Nevertheless, when it comes to post-conflict reconstruction, Turkey will be there, and saying that we will be there to ensure not only to monitor the ceasefire, but ensure that that reconstruction phase will take place in the interest of Palestinians as well. So in the initial phases, Turkey wasn't very present, at least on negotiation tables in Doha. But after this, the negotiation table itself was bombed by Israel. In the new phase, Turkey is very present. Turkey is more vocal. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Donald Trump has a very good relationship with Mr. Erdogan, and there's a lot of responsibility being actually put on Mr. Erdogan's shoulder in terms of the specific Gaza issue. I think as a fruit of that Turkey's presence in the new phase, I think also provides a sense of trust and sense of hope, I think, for the Palestinians, as there is a very strong bonding and relationship, not only between Hamas and Erdogan government, but also between Palestinian people as a whole, as a community, as a group, and the Turkish state. So for that reason, I think Turkey is already on the field right now. Turkish NGOs are trying to rescue people or go through the destruction right now. And even today, I received some news from one of the NGOs. They were saying, looking at the picture, the amount of destruction is very, devastating. These are NGOs that have gone through, let's say, the earthquake in Turkey, but the destruction in Gaza is something that, almost uncomparable, given the scale of destruction was very huge in the earthquake in Turkey 3 years ago. Nevertheless, Turkish NGOs, Turkish state, and Turkish people are going to be supporting this presence in Gaza for the Palestinian people.
And I guess it all comes down to pressure. Ori, you were saying that Israel is weaker, arguing that Israel is the weakest it's been in the last 2 years. Is that putting pressure on Netanyahu? Is that the reality of what is happening to him? And obviously we know Donald Trump has sort of forced him into this deal, really pushing him along this path. I mean, how do you think that he is dealing with that pressure at this point in time?
Well, I think this is both a curse and a blessing for Netanyahu. He is under pressure, certainly for Trump, but he's under pressure to achieve a goal which has the support of the great majority of Israelis, at least temporarily. And that was the return of the hostages and what Israelis are calling an end to the war, which, of course, does not necessarily rule out a future return. This is a blessing for Netanyahu because Netanyahu can now flip. He was the combative prime minister who led Israel through 2 years of hell, an extremely difficult war threatening the very fabric of Israeli life. But he is now, or at least can portray himself as the elder statesman. He can now be the one who is bringing the difficult peace. You know, he's the one. Will people
buy that though? Will Israelis? Sorry, Ori. Will people buy that? Will Israelis actually buy that though?
Well, it's a question of supply and demand. Netanyahu doesn't really have a lot of competition. His would-be heirs either say exactly what he's saying, which is the war needs to end, but we're not ruling out a return to Gaza. We have to take care of our own security. We have to increase the size of our military. We have to get ready for a decade of fighting. All of his would-be competitors are saying that. Or they are discounting him personally, talking about his own quirks and foibles and little corruptions and trial and so on. In any case, Netanyahu is the only person, the only viable political candidate in Israel. Even that big demonstration in Tel Aviv where he was booed, Israeli public discourse went into a 3-day paroxysm of, I don't even know what to call it, about whether it was right to boo him or not right to boo him. But those who booed him and those who did not didn't notice that they were only talking about Netanyahu. So the political truth of the matter is that whatever Netanyahu decides the agenda is, that will be the agenda. If he wants to talk about a deal now, a deal he was coerced into, Israelis won't necessarily buy that with a passion, but when faced with the choice of voting for pale epigons and voting for the original, they'll vote for the original.
He basically just takes up all the oxygen in the political space. Another leader who does that is Donald Trump, obviously. I mean, Javier, he was in Sharm el-Sheikh with all the other world leaders with a peace in the Middle East banner above his head. He needs this ceasefire to work out for his own credibility, doesn't he?
Certainly, but that's why Palestine should be very clear saying that there is no peace here, that the occupation remains, that colonization remains, that attacks on Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza remain, that so far the Israeli army still controls over 53% of Gaza, that we don't know whether they are going to withdraw or not. And even if we are to go through all the stages of President Trump's initiative, Israel will still remain in control of an important part of Gaza. And I think it's very important, this message. Why, Tom? Because this is not just about President Trump putting pressure on Israel. Once again, it is an international movement that has pushed governments to go in that direction. And therefore, this is a moment to continue the pressure. It's not a moment to stop the pressure. It's a moment to continue the pressure in order to not just to ensure that we're going to be able to rebuild Gaza as soon as possible, but also to be able to keep pushing to end Israeli occupation. I know it may sound as a big thing, but we should not forget the context we are in. And this is a context of occupation and a national liberation struggle for the Palestinian people.
Is there a worry, though, that Donald Trump's attention is going to move elsewhere? We've seen in the last few days, he's really talking about Ukraine, meeting with Zelensky, talking with Vladimir Putin on the phone, that he will be distracted by trying to end that war after believing that he's already brought peace to the Middle East. So surely it is on the likes of Egypt, Qatar, Turkiye, Mehmet, to continue putting pressure on Donald Trump to keep everything together right now, don't you think?
Well, I agree. And I think the fact that, I mean, with Qatar, Egypt and Turkiye being on the table in Sharm el-Sheikh, I think that will continue that pressure that not only Donald Trump needs to ensure that this deal is not just something that may be big on the headline, but very weak on the field, and its implementation is not actually taking place. And that pressure is needed on Donald Trump, but also on Israel as well. So that momentum will be continued. Donald Trump wants to end Ukraine, wants to end Gaza and move on to the next task, perhaps in Asia Pacific. But unfortunately, both cases, although they're very different, they're not as simple as Donald Trump wants to put them in terms of their solution. The Gaza issue is not just something that began on October 7th. We very frequently say that. So with this deal that will put us, it started a ceasefire, unfortunately, it's not going to solve the occupation that has been taking place over 7 decades. It's not going to stop an ideology that sees expansion for the whole region as something that they have as an ultimate aim. If Donald Trump says that the war is over and what it means is just a ceasefire, unfortunately, this will going to hunt him back as he's trying to move on to the next theaters for the U.S., perhaps with China in Asia Pacific.
It's never as easy as just signing a bit of paper and peace for everyone. Ori, just finally from you, what are you going to be looking for specifically in the coming days and weeks, especially out of Israel?
Well, I'm going to be looking for both brash statements from Prime Minister Netanyahu's right-wing, especially religious contingent, that will signal desperation and acceptance of the fact that their agenda has not been taken on board by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I'm also going to look for Israeli reticence. If we see Israel settle for what it's been doing over the past few days, over a week, that would signify a significant and perhaps more permanent change of pace. And that, I think, is the best development we can look forward to in the situation on the ground in the Gaza Strip.
Okay, thank you so much, Ori, Xavier and Mehmet. We really do appreciate your time here on Inside Story, and like everyone in Gaza, hopefully that this ceasefire can hold and more aid can quickly get into the Strip. Thanks again. Well, thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, that is aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Tom McRae, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.